Welcome to the Hour of Empowerment. Today we are in Season 3, Organizational Development, and Topic 1, Communication. And we are in Episode 2, Reality Check, Cross-Cultural Communication Competency, and Listening. As usual, before we proceed, I would like to summarize the most important points from last week. Last week we talked about the importance of communication, how much the right-sized communication is important for our success at individual and organizational levels. We talked about the types of communication, benefits we may enjoy, barriers, and how to establish effective communication. Let's quickly revise what we discussed. First, let me ask you, why should we worry about communication? Does communication matter? If so, why? We talked last week that if we don't have effective communication, we can't really be understood. People can't understand us. And also, if somebody doesn't have a communication skill, we may not be able to understand that person. And if we don't have effective communication, we can't have healthy relationships. We can't advance our personal and organizational goals, and we can't learn and grow without effective communication. That means communication is the key for your success. Tell me, what are the types of communication we have? At least 3 of them. Oral or verbal communication, which we use as we discuss 101, when we lead meetings, when we communicate publicly, and so on and so forth. Written communication, which we use as we write articles, blogs, texts, emails, and so on. Visual communication, which we use in the case, for example, right here, I'm using PowerPoint. You can use Blackboard or Whiteboard or flip charts and use visual communication. Electronic communication, such as fax and telephone. Social media, such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. What are the most important benefits we may enjoy when we have great communication skill? Tell me a couple of them. We have personal and organizational benefits. The most important benefit we may enjoy is success. Success in what we do. Specifically, we can achieve our goals with less effort. We can overcome resistance or rejection better. We create and retain relationships with ease. What are the most important lists of barriers? What are the challenges? What are the barriers that stood between you and effective communication? Tell me a couple of them. I believe that you have some barriers. They may not be the same like I am facing, but you have some communication barriers. What are these barriers? Here are my lists of barriers. Self. As you know, we don't just communicate using words and gestures. We also communicate using our mind and our heart. So we need to work on ourselves to battle and finally defeat self as a barrier for effective communication. Message. We communicate to extend our message, but if we cannot be able to articulate our message, it may become a barrier. Irrelevant learning methods and communication approach, because people learn differently. Unless we use relevant and different and diverse methods and approach, we may not succeed in our communication. Communication incompetency, especially when we communicate with group of people, we need to have eye contact, we need to have well-calculated gestures, movements, passion, vocal variety, and so on and so forth. Unable to cross the generational gap. When we communicate with people from different generations, we should be able to communicate according to the generation we have at hand. We should know how to communicate with the young audience, the adult audience, and the older audience. We need to know how to communicate. Inability to cross diverse cultures, especially in the 21st century. Virtually or in person, we communicate with people from diverse cultures. So if we don't know how to communicate effectively, it may become a barrier. Last but not least, failure to listen. What it takes to establish effective communication within your team or organization. Tell me a couple of them. We need to ask these questions and answer adequately to have effective communication within your team and organization. What do you use to communicate internally? What are the customs? How do you communicate externally? Do you have a communication strategy? If you have, do all stakeholders understand your strategy? These are very important to establish effective communication within your team and organization. Now today we're going to start a new episode 2. And let's begin with a simple reality check. These reality check, it helps you to understand whether you have all-rounded communication ability or not. There are 6 parameters, and you scale yourself from 1 to 5. 1 being poor and 5 being excellent. Now, how do you rate yourself when it comes to communicating orally? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? How do you rate yourself when it comes to written communication? Let me ask you, if you rate yourself 5, what should be the main decision for you to rate yourself 5? Let me tell you, a simple measure is whether you have published or not. Have you published articles, blogs, and books? If you achieved that, maybe you can rate yourself 5 when it comes to written communication. What about listening skill? If you are talkative, maybe you are 1. But if you balance between talking and listening, maybe you are 3. But if you are attentive and you listen, if you use your ears and heart to listen, maybe you can rate yourself 4 or 5. What about using stories in your communication? What about communicating using social media? For example, if you don't have any social media network, well, you may rate yourself 1. But if you have, for example, LinkedIn, but you don't have Facebook and Twitter, you may rate yourself 2. But if you have social media network on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and you are communicating with your followers on a daily basis, you may rate yourself 5. What about cross-cultural communication skill? If you never cross a culture, you may rate yourself 1. But if you have crossed some cultures and you have been communicating with people from these cultures, maybe you rate yourself 3. However, if you crossed lots of cultures and communicated effectively with people from diverse cultures and you got some feedback from these people, well, you may rate yourself 4 or 5. This reality check is just for you to know where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, just to help you focus and improve your weaknesses. You may be successful when it comes to oral communication, or maybe successful when it comes to social media, but you may be poor when it comes to listening or using stories in your communication. Once you know your weaknesses, you work on your weaknesses to improve them and become all-rounded communicator. Because as we discussed last week, communication is the #1 tool for you to succeed. Let's talk about cross-cultural communication competency. The 21st century marketplace filled with diverse people demands cross-cultural communication ability so that you may avoid cultural clashes and communicate successfully with diverse people. But when we are not successful to communicate with people from diverse culture, what happened? Culture shock. For that matter, what do we all have in common when we first crossed a culture? Culture shock. According to Wikipedia, culture shock is the anxiety, feelings of frustration, alienation, and anger that may occur when a person is placed in a new culture. The anxiety, feelings of frustration, alienation, and anger that may occur when a person is placed in a new culture. The question is, why do we exhibit these symptoms? Why do you think? Why did you experience culture shock when you first crossed a culture which is different than yours? The answer is very simple. Because we haven't prepared for it. We have been nurtured and shaped in a certain ways in our culture. And when we cross a new culture for which we are strangers, we don't know how to communicate, behave, or do things in that particular culture. And therefore, we may experience the above-mentioned signs of frustrations. Of course, the magnitude of the shock may vary from person to person. For some of us, it may be 1 or 2 on the Richter scale. Or it may be 7 or 8 or even 9 on the Richter scale. Let me ask you, how much was the shock when you first crossed a new culture? Did you experience 8, 7, or 9 on the Richter scale, or 1 or 2? What? I had an experience of culture shock when I visited some Western and Southern African countries when I was the leader of Addis Ababa University students. And also, I had the same experience in the early days of my stay in the United States. Now, the most important question is, how can we mitigate culture shock? As you can see, I said that mitigate because we can't really avoid culture shock. We can't totally escape some forms of culture shock. I have 3 suggestions on how to mitigate culture shock. First, understand the cultural divides in the world. Second, study and research cultures you intend to cross. Third, get advices from others. Let's talk about cultural divides in the world. According to many cultural experts, the world's cultures could be divided into 2, individual-based cultures and communal-based cultures. Of course, there are exceptional individuals who may not display all the features in their culture. And there are also some subcultures within a culture. Let's compare the 2 main cultures using 3 parameters developed by Edward Hall: context, time, and space. We don't have to see all of these 3 parameters, but let me take the first one, context, and compare 2 cultures, representative from individual-based and communal-based. Let's take Ethiopian culture, a representative from communal cultures. It is a high context culture, which means many people communicate their ideas and express themselves covertly, implicitly, and non-verbally. Many of us are reserved to express ourselves and are inward compared to people from individual-based cultures. What about the US culture? It is the opposite. It is low context culture, which means many Americans communicate their ideas and express themselves overtly, explicitly, and verbally. Let's talk about the second method we can use to mitigate cultural shock. According to Geert Hofstede, there are 5 cultural dimensions to study and understand cultures in the world. Power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, and long-term orientation. We don't have enough time to discuss the 5 cultural dimensions, but let me take one of them, power distance. For example, countries like Latin America, Asian countries, African countries, and Middle Eastern countries, power distance is high, which means people accept that power is distributed unequally. On the other hand, power distance is low when it comes to countries like Israel, Northern Europe, America, and Australia. And people accept that power relations are more consultative or democratic. Let's talk about the third approach we can use to mitigate cultural shock. That is getting advices from individual adherents from that culture. People who lived in that particular culture we intend to cross, so that we can at least avoid committing lethal cultural offenses and mitigate the magnitude of the cultural shock. Of course, cross-cultural communication is not all about communicating using language. We need to understand and study the history, the tradition, the politics, and the religion of cultures we would like to cross. Now, let me give you some questions to make sure that you have some difficulties when it comes to cross-cultural communication, to know that whether you embrace multiculturalism or not. If you are in a group, make yourself accountable, make yourself honest, and answer these questions. These questions are, first, have you tried to loosen your accent when you communicate with people who are not in your country or in your region? Because when you communicate with other people from other cultures, if you use the same intonation, the same melody, you can't really communicate and be understood by people from another region and country. So you should at least loosen the accent. I mean, it doesn't mean that you lose your culture or you lose who you are. I mean, your purpose of communicating with another person is to be understood. So you need to loosen your accent and help the other person to understand you. Second, do you use regional slang when you talk with people from a different dialect? When you communicate with people from another culture, try to reduce your slangs. The third question is, do you have friends from diverse cultures you hang out with? If you are interested to develop cross-cultural communication, you should not just read and understand cultures. You need to hang out with people from diverse cultures. Have you acquainted yourself with the history of other people, or are you always interested with your only culture? Have you read the biographies of people who are not native in your culture? To understand cultures, you may need to read the biographies of influential people from other cultures. I'm asking you these questions because I wanted you to know whether you embraced multiculturalism or not, whether you are on the road to develop cross-cultural communication or not. If you're not losing your accent to help other people to understand you, if you are not dropping some of your slang, or if you're not hanging out with people from different cultures, if you're not reading the history of other nations, if you don't read the biographies of other people from other diverse cultures, that means you're not making some efforts. Now let's talk about active listening. Active listening. Many relationships ruined because of lack of active listening. When people are asked why their relationship ruined and failed, he may say, she doesn't listen to me. Or she may say, he doesn't listen to me. But if we develop active listening, not only we succeed in a given instance, we could be able to continue the relationship, influence others, and continue to have relationships with others. When we do that, people understand us as respectful and trustworthy people. They know that we care and love them, because listening is an expression of love. Let me tell you one secret. Don't tell to other people. If you want to know someone respects you, care about you, love you, well, you have to have a parameter to check that, which is listening. Does that person listen to you? If not, his respect, his honor, his love is, or her love is, in question. So you should understand that listening is an expression of love. I like what Paul Tillich said. He said that the first duty of love is listening. The first duty of love is listening. Why do you think we don't listen actively? Why? Have you ever tried to understand why you or somebody is not listening actively? Do you know the reason? Let me give you a couple of reasons. When we are preoccupying ourselves with personal, pressing, and urgent matters, we may not listen. When we are absorbed by what we would reply as soon as the speaker finishes, we may not pay any attention to what he has to say. When we are engrossed with preconceived biases towards the speaker or his beliefs or message, we may not listen to that person. When we are distracted by external factors and when we are engaged with our emotion rather than our heart, we may not listen. Let's see each one of them. When we are preoccupied with urgent matters like the kids or bills or the job and so on, while we are listening another person, chances are high that we may not listen to that person. Rather than giving our attention and listening actively as the other person talks, we may be distracted to think about things that are urgent, that are on our plate. But if we would like to listen actively, what we should do, we have to let go of urgent things and focus on that person. For example, when I come to this studio to record this training, I let go lots of urgent matters in my life and focus here. I should give my 100% attention to you. The same with you. If you are listening someone, give that person 100% attention. Don't think about urgent matters for that 10 minutes, for that 15 minutes, for that 30 minutes or 1 hour. Give your full attention right there. When we are absorbed by what we reply as soon as the person finishes, we don't listen. We are contemplating how we reply. Sometimes we don't even wait the person to finish. Rather, we interrupt and make sure that our points of views are heard. We should not do that. We should not interrupt people. Of course, I can tell you from my experience that sometimes you may be forced to interrupt someone because somebody may jump from ideas to ideas and you like to say something on an agenda or on a topic, and somebody may jump into another topic before you say something. If it is very important for you to interrupt that person, make sure that you are conscious about it. What I normally do that, I stop that person and tell that person that, sorry, I cut you off, but I would like to say something about this topic. The point is, it is good to wait until the other person finishes and listen what he has to say, than thinking what you're going to reply. And if you must interrupt someone, make sure that you are conscious about it and ask excuse. When we are engrossed with preconceived biases, when we have prejudice towards the speaker, his beliefs, his message, chances are high that we don't listen what he has to say. Believe me, If you have any bias towards me or the message I'm trying to extend or my beliefs, you don't listen to me. You don't even come to watch this program. Why? Because you have some prejudice, some biases that you don't listen what I have to say. Similarly, if somebody has any bias against you or your beliefs or your message, they may not listen to you. The same way, if you have that kind of biases against the speaker, the person who is trying to communicate to you, you may not listen. So when we listen to somebody else, let's forget about the prejudice. Let's forget about our biases and focus on that person, at least until that person finishes his talk. The fourth reason is we may be distracted by external factors. These external factors could be related to the environment, the people around us, or the way the person dressed, his styles or her styles, his movements or her movements. And when that happens, our attention is diverted and we criticize silently how the environment should have been organized, how the person should have dressed, how he should have moved his hands, how people should have behaved, and so on. You see, external factors distracted us. When we are distracted by external factors, what happens? We don't listen. When we are engaged with our emotions and engaging ourselves with our heart, chances are high that we may be offended when we hear some terms or ideas. Or whenever we differ with the speaker, we are caught up with a disagreeing spirit. And we stop listening the remainder of the talk, and we can't wait to react angrily or leave the conversation. You should not do that. Whenever you communicate with someone else, pay attention and listen. Not only you should listen with your ears, but with your heart. That's true listening. Now the question is, how do we discipline ourselves and listen actively and save our relationships and increase our trustworthiness? What do you think we should do to improve our listening skill? Have you tried something? Would you like to share that to your friends and your colleagues? Let me suggest my ideas to improve active listening. The first suggestion is embrace listening. Believe that listening is the most important component of communication. There are three types of communication. What are the three components of communication? Relating, connecting, and listening. Let me give you a simple example. If you would like to communicate with me, first you need to relate with me. You need to get my emails, my phone. And you should create some kind of relation before I communicate with you, before you connect with me, before I listen to you. Once you get my number, once we have a relationship, then when you call, I'll pick up the phone, I'll talk to you, I'll listen to you, and so on and so forth. Therefore, if we believe that listening is one of the critical components of communicating, then we take it seriously. Communication without listening is incomplete. Say it. Communication without listening is incomplete. You're right. The second suggestion is, for us to actively listen, we need to respect and honor that individual. Believe me, if you don't respect and honor the person you are trying to communicate, you don't listen to them. That's why I like Brian McGillis' quote. He said that one of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. One of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. The third suggestion is training ourselves to listen consciously. First, let's listen ourselves. Listen our inner voice. When we train ourselves to listen our inner voice, chances are high that we may listen. Let me repeat this. When we listen our inner voice, chances are high that we may listen other people actively. Not only we should listen ourselves, of course we should listen others. The fourth suggestion is develop the ability to listen nature and our source. Not only you should listen to your inner voice and other people, listen the environment, listen your source. The more you develop your listening skills, the more you become active listener when you relate and communicate with other people. The fifth suggestion is join organizations that may provide you the opportunity to practice, to develop your communication and listening skills. 6, get feedback from the people around you. Ask them whether you listen to them or not. Believe me, many people want to tell you that you're not listening. But they don't want to tell you that because they're afraid that they may lose the relationship. But if you open up the door, and if you ask them feedback, whether you listen to them, they will tell you. Ask people closer to me. Some of them say that, wow, you listen. You wait until I finish my statements. But some of them tell me that, oh, you are still a talking head. That's good to get this kind of feedback, because once we know that we are not listening, we improve it. We take time, train ourselves, practice to listen. For me, in the past couple of years, I'm trying my best to listen. I've improved a lot, but still I'm working on it. What about you? Have you asked people that whether you listen to them or not? In conclusion, we need to be well developed. We need to have all-rounded communication. We should be effective communicators, orally, in written. We need to use stories, listen actively, and be effective cross-cultural communicator. In the 21st century, there is no way that we can succeed without communication. It's very important, especially if you are communicating with diverse people from diverse cultures. You need to have cross-cultural communication skill. Therefore, let's go beyond talking. Let's develop listening. Let's develop cross-cultural communication ability. Let's sometimes shut up and listen. Let's sometimes shut up and listen. Because we don't listen, we have lost lots of great relationships and partnerships. So this is time to listen and save our relationships, increase our trustworthiness. Train to listen. Let me give you a good example. Dr. John Maxwell, one of the great leadership experts that I admire, he once said that he trains himself to listen. Whenever he goes out to talk to people, he goes with his legal pad and he writes capital L at the top right side of the legal pad to remind him to listen. So whenever he is tempted to say something, to interrupt, let me repeat this. When he is tempted to say something and interrupt the other person, he looks at the L and that reminds him not to interrupt. My friend, what are you doing to improve your listening ability? Because it is critical for your success to communicate and achieve your personal and organizational success. This is time to stop to sabotage your success because you don't listen. Remember, we have 2 ears for a reason than one, like our mouth. Therefore, we need to listen most of the time. Until I see you next week, keep listening. Thank you very much for watching.